Welcome to another episode of Calling Old Hollywood. I'm your host, Kat Lively, and with us today is Lora Stocker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Kat. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. Enjoying a beautiful, beautiful day of North Carolina weather. It's bright Carolina blue skies out today.
That's great. I know we're getting back into the warmer weather. I think East Coast has gotten the cold pretty bad lately.
Yeah, and it's been very wet all year, so we're glad for any dry days we get lately.
Absolutely. So for the listeners who do not know who you are, do you want to give an introduction about yourself?
Sure. If I don't normally talk about myself a lot, I talk about other people, but I'll certainly be happy to do that.
Absolutely.
I am, as I said, based in North Carolina, and I am a graphic designer and artist. I have my own design business and work with a variety of clients, including I do quite a bit of freelance work with Turner Classic Movies, working with their social media team. That's been one of the great career highlights so far. And it ties in my love of design and classic film, so it's been a great fit. And then back in 2019, I was asked to join the board of directors for the Ava Gardner Museum, which is located in Smithfield, North Carolina, Ava Gardner's hometown. So I've been slowly but surely becoming a sort of an Avatologist ever since. I was always a fan of hers prior to joining the board, but then got involved with volunteering with the museum and helping them kind of amp up some of their social media presence in leading up to one of their big events, and got along really well with the team, and then was asked to join the board, and it's just been a wonderful experience ever since. I work primarily, again, kind of in that same space, as a social media strategist and consultant with, that's kind of my major contribution within the board. And then helping on special event committees and helping some with the exhibit work and that kind of thing, just to continue to share the life and legacy of Ava Gardner.
That's incredible. And
thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You should be very proud about talking about it. That's amazing.
I appreciate that.
Definitely. I think it's so interesting sometimes how, I don't know if you feel this way, but sometimes I feel like these kind of actors, or, if you're into the golden age of Hollywood, or I guess different things in life, but sometimes things kind of have their way of choosing you, and that's
absolutely.
That's the kind of energy I'm getting about this Ava Gardner thing. I have this similar thing with James Dean, and it's really interesting. So what are some of the of course, I mean, it's a given, Ava Gardner was incredible, but having worked with everything that you have, what are some of your favorite characteristics about her films?
Well, it's hard to pinpoint just one thing, as I'm sure you feel the same about James Dean.
Right.
I'm if you can't tell by the accent, I'm born and raised North Carolina. So Ava was someone who was always sort of in my consciousness. I was a film fan from infancy on.
Yeah.
And very influenced by my parents, grandparents, and just kind of film, and the merging of film and history, and being a fan of history and all that, and learning more about Ava. And then when the museum sort of opened and ramped up when I was coming of age and that sort of thing, it was just really great to have this resource right, kind of just down the road, right. Where I could make these connections with somebody who, Ava Gardner was very proud of her background in North Carolina, stayed very close to her family, that some of whom are still in the area, and had really close ties to home, and never kind of shied away from her background or her history, and loved North Carolina. And ultimately that's where she, when she passed away, that's where she had put in her will to come back home. And I just found that really interesting, and a lot about her story, especially as I got older and started reading more about her, and learning more, especially in my recent work with the museum. just how down to earth she was in so many ways, and how she ultimately really stayed true to herself, even kind of in the the navigating the difficulties that were Hollywood, that probably to some degree have always existed in that industry, in the entertainment industry, but being able to kind of still, going to Hollywood when she did at such a young age, and they made attempts to make her over and change her, but it was when she stayed true to herself, when the camera saw her for her naturalness. That's when she became a star. Right. And those are the roles that have continued to resonate. And then just kind of making her own life decisions, even if they were somewhat controversial or different or unexpected. She ultimately tried to live her life on her own terms in the ways that worked best for her. And I think that's really, that's very modern. Yeah. That's very, a current sensibility. And, whether or not
she was a rebel.
Really whether she identified as a feminist or anything like that, I think her story and her life and the way she lived her life really leans into that being kind of a strong-willed person. And I just find a lot of that resonates with me a lot. So there's a lot to mine over.
Yeah, no,
absolutely, and in terms of her career,
absolutely. She's her story. I love, because it was it was almost like a fluke, right? Wasn't it? She did some. She did some photographs. I can't remember details. She did the photographs. Was it for like a family member or someone, and they put it up in their storefront?
Yeah, so she was the youngest of 7 children. Her eldest sister, there was a 19-year age difference. And her oldest sister, Beatrice, who she nicknamed Bappy. So that was what the whole family called her, and what most people think when they name her sisters, they name her Bappy. Bappy was kind of a trailblazer too. I mean, she got married really young, and she felt her marriage wasn't going to work out, so she got a divorce in rural North Carolina, which was unheard of from a sort of traditional Southern Baptist family. And she said, no, this isn't working out. I'm going to go and blaze my own path. And so she ended up moving to New York ultimately. And while she was in New York, starting her own career and everything, she met a photographer named Larry Tarr, who he and his family had several photography studios in the city, and they met and married. And then when Ava was in between her senior year of high school and her first year of secretarial school, she went up to visit Bappy for summer vacation. And while she was there, Larry Tarr took a series of photos of Ava by herself, some of Ava with Bappy. They're a beautiful series of photos. They really capture her ease in front of the camera, which is really remarkable at 18 to just seemingly just kind of naturally know how to pose and all that. And one of the photos just turned out exceptionally, it was just an exceptional photo, really stunning, really showed off her striking features and all that. And he put it in his window, and there's sort of conflicting stories exactly what happened, but what really happened is guy that worked with Lowe's theater chain, he walked by and saw it and called the studio trying to get her phone number, pretending to be like a scout. But he wanted to go on a date. Right. This photo.
Yes.
And the folks at the studio were like, or at the photography studio were like, yeah, we know what you're doing. This isn't right. But Larry and Bappy thought, she is beautiful in these photos. We should send them to MGM. So that's what they did. They submitted them, and then Ava got called to come back to New York from North Carolina to do a screen test.
I love that story.
And ultimately, that screen test led to a 7-year contract, and that she had enrolled in secretarial school at a college in North Carolina, not far from where she went to high school, and that was her plan. That was the path she was going to take, get a certificate and get a job as a secretary, and probably ultimately marry, settle down, and live in eastern North Carolina near the bulk of her family. But but, life had other plans.
Exactly.
And it all started with that photo.
God, it's just so incredible. I love that story so much that it was just such a chance.
Well, it sounds like it's out of a movie.
It does.
It sounds like the kind of story that would have been written, very similar to kind of Lana Turner's Genesis story of, her career kicking off. It has that same, just fluke.
Yeah, it was just by chance, you couldn't plan it. It just happened. I love that kind of, those kind of stories. Somebody needs to do a film. Incredible. Her career and her life, as you were saying, she stayed very true to herself. She really stayed close to her roots. Like, she was such a star, and she was so vibrant, and she was so, strong-willed and all of that. But she always maintained that sense of, I think, humility, which is, I think so. It's such an admirable quality, and back then I feel like there were a few stars that really kept to that. And, what do you think the reason for that is?
Well, I'm sure, it would vary case to case, but in terms of Ava, something that a lot of people may not know about her or may not kind of put in the broad context of her entire life and career is that she was someone who did have insecurities. And in fact, that's one of the things that she and Frank Sinatra had in common at the period at which they were together, which I'm sure we'll get to in a little bit. But,
yes.
When I mentioned that she came up to New York to do that screen test, 18 years old, I don't remember if she took the bus or train, but anyway, got up to New York, went to the screen test. And when she got there and did the screen test, they couldn't understand her accent.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I could identify with, because sometimes people can't understand my Southern accent, right. And I'm very conscious of it, even though I can't get rid of it. It's there to stay. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't understand her, so they ended up saying, come back tomorrow, let's try this again, and they did a silent test. Which you can find on YouTube or see clips, photos from it and all. And she's walking around, in a lovely dress, great posture, great presence, and puts some flowers in a vase and moves the vase around and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's a silent screen test. And then, she went out to Hollywood, that was 1941 when she got signed for that contract. August of 41 is when she left. Bathy actually, Ava's mother said, I don't want my baby going out there by herself to Hollywood at 18. She needs a chaperone. And Bathy said, I'll go. Yeah. And so the two of them embarked on this journey together in August of 41. And when she got out there, that was at a time where MGM had in their mind, a very clear idea of what their stars were. Mm-hmm. What kind of star was an MGM star? How they looked, how they dressed, the kind of makeup they wore.
The crazy rules the studios used to have. Yes. Oh my God!
And when people think of Ava today, and obviously, kind of people gravitate to her beauty first, and then they see all of the other characteristics and traits that ultimately made her a star and made her a really fascinating person. But it's that striking beauty of that, the dimple in her chin, the kind of thicker eyebrows, which were not quite as common. Right. This was pre-Elizabeth Taylor's rise.
Yes.
So and the striking, this dark hair, and the just that she had a beautiful smooth skin and really beautiful green eyes,
and her
all
curves.
That. And she was rather curvaceous, but they get there and they're like, we need to pluck your eyebrows, we want to fill in that dimple in your chin, we need to put a lot of makeup on you, your hair needs to be teased up, mm-hmm. And they tried to almost take away everything that made her so distinctive, and ultimately is what was captured in that first photograph.
Yeah.
But coupling that with, we got to get rid of this accent for you. We got to change it. We got to make you sound more like, what we think you should sound like. So that's a tough pill to swallow at 18.
Right.
I can imagine.
Definitely.
Where and then she spent 5 years basically in the little, walk on, sometimes mostly uncredited roles. She did about 20 films in that first 5 years before she was loaned out
Yeah.
to do the film Whistle Stop, which ultimately led to her doing the film The Killers.
Mm-hmm.
And that 1-2 punch of films in 1946 is what led her to be a star. But those films, especially The Killers, let her look more like herself. Her makeup was less, it was less MGM makeup because she was at Universal.
Right.
She was, her hair had its natural curls to it and waves. And that's what resonated. That's what lit up the screen, was her at her most, at her most Ava.
Authentic,
where she wasn't
yes.
made up to be something else. But those insecurities, I think, really, kind of stayed with her throughout her life. She was always she would make little comments like, I'm not really much of an actress and that kind of thing, even though she was. And she really
she was
learned
humble.
her craft. Yeah, and but it's really interesting to kind of think back on that sort of thing and how those insecurities really kind of, stayed with her through her life and shaped a lot of, to some degree, her decisions or her relationships with people. And, even though she was very sure of herself and confident in a lot of ways, she didn't like being in public. She did very few, if any, interviews. She was very suspicious of the press and coverage and that sort of thing. And so, I don't know, it's just kind of an interesting, and that's not uncommon. That happened to a lot of other stars, especially those that came to MGM at that sort, you think of Judy Garland and all the things they tried to change about her. And when they let her be herself, that's when she became, the star that we know and love that resonates today. Same with Ava.
Yeah, she was such a powerhouse. I loved that. I love that about her, though. I think that's what makes her the most interesting to me is, her confidence yet insecurities. She was so obviously human. And of course, back then it's like we didn't have Google, we didn't have all these things where we could learn about someone's life, but now that we do, and you can get the full picture of where someone comes from and how they dealt with things, and she really handled it. She did so exceedingly well, obviously with the lack of that she felt she had, which was
well. And I think she I think that really gets at it. I think you're right on the money with that she really took what life presented her. And it was like, I'm here at this point in my life, or I'm getting this opportunity to go to travel here or do this. I'm going to make the most of this. I'm going to, fully embrace this new culture that I'm getting exposed to, or this new place, this experience. She just really lived life with kind of a lot of fullness and passion that is enviable in a lot of ways. I think everybody struggles to some degree with insecurities about things, and I can sometimes second guess myself and like, ooh, do I want to take that risk or make that choice? How's that going to play out? And I try to think, 100 steps ahead. Not that she didn't do that too, but I think that she even if decisions were tough and again against the grain of what was expected of her, she ultimately tried to do what she felt was right for her, what was going to lead to her happiness or her satisfaction or contentment.
Right.
And kind of, just like, okay, well, I don't care if you're going to judge me for that, or, people have judged me for all sorts of things, and I'm going to make these decisions because they work for me and they're best for me. Absolutely. And that's what I have to do. And I just think that's really remarkable, and to sometimes unheard of, even today.
Absolutely. So we'll talk a little bit about her love life. I know we mentioned briefly Sinatra. She had quite the taste in men, would you say?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that we've been doing with the museum recently is we've been expanding kind of our virtual offerings. Obviously, in the light of the pandemic, we've had to pivot a little bit.
Right.
And so we've been doing some virtual exhibits that folks can access, and we've started a new series called Ava Chats, where we have kind of a deep dive conversation about different subjects, and we've done 2 so far, and we did a special one around Valentine's that was all about her 3 marriages. Right. And kind of, Ava in love and marriage, that sort of thing. And And we had, previous to that, we had written a series of blog posts, kind of a high-level overview, but a bit of a deep dive that tied into some of the collection items that the museum has about each husband. And, it's really interesting now because we can look back on the life of a star, and we can look at their life in totality. And it's easy to say, well, gosh, how did she end up with this person? Or why did they make this decision or that decision? And we have to kind of remove ourselves from the current, although we can still look at it through the lens of the whole.
Right.
But we have to kind of take ourselves back and see, try to put ourselves in the mindset and the time frame of when certain key decisions were made in someone's life to try and kind of understand those decisions. Mm-hmm. And she did have, as you mentioned, 3 high-profile marriages.
Right.
Her first marriage was to Mickey Rooney, her second to Artie Shaw, and her third, of course, and most famous one was to the person she called the love of her life, and who might say the same about her, was to Frank Sinatra.
Yeah.
And the first marriage, Mickey Rooney, she was 19 when they married. And in fact, I was recently doing some additional research on a project, and pretty much, I'm not sure if all of her sisters did, but most of them, and her mother, got married at 19.
Wow.
So it's kind of like that was the example she had. My sisters got married at 19. My mom got married at 19. Her parents had a happy marriage, a largely equitable marriage, certainly which was kind of unusual for the time. They both worked and both contributed to the household and all of that. And they gave her a very loving home in spite of the Great Depression and all the kind of financial upheavals of that period of time. Mm-hmm. But she expected marriage to be like that. She expected it to be, these two people are in love and they're going to build a life together. Well, when she married Mickey, she met him on her second day in Hollywood.
Yes.
She leaves North Carolina. She gets this unbelievable opportunity to be a movie star at the biggest studio in the world. And on day 2, she's taking a tour of the studio, and she meets Mickey Rooney while he's filming Babes on Broadway dressed as Carmen Miranda. My goodness.
She played a little hard to get with him, didn't she?
She did, and it's funny. I mean, again, he at that point in time he was
determined.
He was the biggest star. He was the biggest male star in Hollywood 3 years consecutive.
Right.
And he was, one of the most profitable stars because his films, the Andy Hardy series, was incredibly kind of cheap to make. It didn't require a lot. They had the sets built, everything was there. The stories were easy to come together and write and all. So he was really a huge bankable star, and he's filming this comedic number, and he looks across the studio and sees her, and he's wowed by her, who he doesn't even know. That's a testament to how striking she must have been in person.
Right.
And yes, she did play hard to get, and it's one of those things where it's more that she was just like, I don't know anybody here, and
like, who's this Hollywood type?
And I'm 18, and I mean, I know who these people are because she was a movie fan. She loved movies and loved music,
right?
And she knew
Artie Shaw was her favorite.
She loved. Yeah, she grew up listening to his music and dancing at a local small kind of music pavilion near a lake in Smithfield, North Carolina. That's where she'd go dancing with friends and stuff in the summer and all, and loved Artie. But yeah, so here's the biggest star in the world, and he wants to go out, with me, and I'm 18, and I'm second day in Hollywood.
Right.
So it's pretty remarkable. And she did kind of ultimately was like, no, I just don't know that this is too much.
Yeah.
But he was very persistent, and they did end up going out. And then, here she is, 18, and she loves movies, loves the movie stars, loves all these musicians and all. And he's taking her to Ciro's and, the Coconut Grove and all of that. And he's sitting in with, he's playing drums with Tommy Dorsey's band.
Right.
And, I mean, who wouldn't be wowed by that?
Absolutely.
At 18. And he really wined and dined her and made her feel like, I mean, they go to play. She said on their first date, that she met Jimmy Durante,
Jeez.
you know, and he would take her around and be like, look at my date. It's Ava Gardner. Isn't she gorgeous? She's wonderful. Meet, you know, here, Cary Grant, meet Ava Gardner, and all this sort of stuff. I mean,
right.
It's amazing to kind of try and put yourself back
Absolutely.
in how that must have felt at 18.
To imagine that.
And at this point, she hadn't even made a movie.
Right.
She hadn't even been in anything yet, you know? And so he was very persistent, and then he said, you know, I want to marry you. And she was like, I don't know. And he just kind of kept, he proposed like every
persistent.
day. And she ultimately said, I'll marry you, but I want to wait till I'm 19.
Mm-hmm.
So she could be like the other women in her family. And it was a short romance. It didn't last very long, but I think she really did love him. I think she just expected more than either he or really she were able to make of it, you know.
Right.
They were just too young, and the pressures of the career in Hollywood and
showbiz. I mean, when you take all of that into consideration, the heat of the press, the hours on the film sets, all of the things that are so required from these people. I mean, yeah, it's a recipe for disaster unless you can really figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah, but she spoke very fondly of him for the rest of her life. And, if you read any of, her autobiography, Ava My Story, or any of the subsequent books that were written with or without her permission or involvement, even though, he was a philanderer and a gambler and all of these sorts of things, she still loved him and had kind things to say about him. And they stayed in contact for the remainder of her life. And in fact, he and his last wife, Jan, they visited the museum in Smithfield. They were touring.
Wow.
And they stopped by the museum, and there's a great photo that was done by the local newspaper in Smithfield of them sitting there with Ava, one of Ava's, the Barefoot Contessa illustration in the background, and they're watching the film where Mickey's quoted, that's the intro film of the theater, and it's just really great that, he's
so sweet.
The only one that did that. Yeah. And I just think that's really, I think it's a testament to her that she stayed close with all of her husbands, So, obviously Mickey, and then you mentioned Artie. Mm-hmm. She really did adore Artie Shaw. She thought he was just the most intellectual man she ever met.
It's like a childhood crush come true, right? That whole thing.
I think so. I think that's a great way of looking at it, yeah. And he was so different. Mickey was this firecracker, young, exciting, but go. Just, to some degree, like his screen persona, just so much energy that you think he's going to explode.
Right. Energizer Bunny.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. And Artie was more subdued and intellectual and, thoughtful in the sense of, let's sit down, let's have a conversation. I mean, you can kind of imagine like the Algonquin table kind of thing, And he did expose Ava to different, he exposed her to a lot of musicians and other, in his field, but also, writers and just people that were kind of the intellectual set in Hollywood at that time. And they had another kind of quick romance. They lived together for a while, and they had a wonderful courtship. It was once they got married that things soured.
Right.
And he became it's often kind of likened to like, My Fair Lady kind of situation.
Yeah.
Where he tried to say, well, you're not smart enough and you're not this, that. And that's unfortunate because that fed into her insecurities. And she was insecure about not having a more robust education. So she said, you know what, I'm going to go to UCLA and I'm going to take classes. And I'm going to read, you want me to read? Sure, I'm going to read all these books. And she amassed a huge library in her lifetime, a lot of which we have at the museum, in addition to a huge record collection. But, she really tried to do that in the vein of, it was somewhat, I think she would have probably gotten to that point in her life regardless, but I think he did light a fire under her a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that's how she kind of rationalized it or viewed it later in life.
Yeah.
But he was cruel about it, and that's really unfortunate. But that being said, she still had a good rapport with him, and she said, sometimes he's a hard person to be around and difficult, and you hate him, but then you turn right around and love him.
Right.
And she did try to look at all of these relationships fondly. as best she could when she was, writing her autobiography at the end of her life.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, Frank came along.
Right.
And he was somebody she had known, through the MGM circles and all leading up to that, since they were both under contract. But it was actually that photograph, that great photograph of the MGM anniversary that was taken at the luncheon,
mm-hmm.
where they kind of, it was kind of like, hey, I hadn't seen you in a while. You look great. What's
Yep.
going on?
Absolutely.
Where they, sparks started to fly.
Mm-hmm.
And they did have kind of she described them as lovers forever, or lovers eternal,
That's so
and
sweet.
I think that's how they viewed each other, even if they weren't. It was kind of a can't live with each other, can't live without each other sort of situation.
Double-edged sword, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Wow, yeah. Their romance was one of them, it's so, the more that I read and the more that I find out about classic Hollywood, there was so much infelity that went on with these.
Oh, yeah.
So many.
It was kind of a given. It's
many.
Remarkable if a couple made it.
I know. That's, that was one of the things, Bogey and Bacall, everybody. There was this strain of infidelity, but it's like the people that made it and they ended up getting together after the mess. They really had, even if it wasn't long lived, they really had a very authentic love for each other, and it's a testament, Frank and Ava. Absolutely.
Yeah, and again, kind of going back to what we were saying earlier about trying to put yourself back in that context. I hope people don't. Ava stands on her own.
Yes.
I think, and her career and her performances, and sometimes people will frame her try to frame her in the context of that one love affair.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate. And especially when you go back and you look at where they both were in their lives when they did get together, 49 and 50,
right.
where, and then they got married in 51. And at that point in time, Frank Sinatra's career was waning substantially. It was the end of the war. He was having issues with his voice. His concerts weren't as popular.
Thank God for
his MGM contract.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From Here to Eternity saved him, And
it did. And Ava helped get that a reality.
Yes.
So she was incredible.
She doesn't get enough credit for that.
She does not. And she was at the beginning of the peak of her career when they got together. And even with all the tabloid fodder that their relationship was, she did, Pandora and the Flying Dutchman, Showboat, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, all of these great films that came out between 50 and, 54, 55, all in that little window. And that was, when that was their courtship, marriage, and their later divorce in 57. But throughout that period, she's having this, her career's just going gangbusters, and his was waning. And she did, she knew that if he got that part, and he wanted it and he lobbied for it, but she knew if he got that part, it would bring his career back, but it also might end their relationship because the stresses of the two careers.
Yeah.
Not that they never seemed to have any jealousy about each other's career. It was more personal jealousies, or, why are you looking at him? Why are you looking at her? That kind of thing. And they're just kind of passionate.
They were both dynamite.
They had a very similar temperament. In fact, people who knew them said that they were kind of too much alike.
Yeah.
And they both had those insecurities. Frank was very insecure at the time that they got married because of all the kind of career turmoil he was going through. And then, of course, his highly publicized divorce from Nancy, and all of the stress of that. But that was the beginning of that marriage, and they went into that marriage. They took that risk of getting married and being together. That shows how much they did love each other and how passionate they were. That, they said, well, despite the bad press, despite what our studio says, or you not having a studio now, you being in a career slump, we're going to do this because we love each other and we kind of have to try. We have to try and make it. And ultimately it didn't work out, but they
gave it one hell of a shot.
Close. They sure did. They did, and they stayed so close and so friendly and connected all the way to the end, and he sent flowers to her every year on her birthday, and she would set them on her mantelpiece. Yellow roses were her favorite, and he'd send her that on her birthday, and she put them on the mantle and let them just kind of dry until the next bouquet came the next year, and boom, and that's just really neat that they always had that love for each other, and they reconciled here and there, but it never took for too long, unfortunately.
He was also very protective of her. There was a story, she was in an abusive relationship, and they told Frank about it, and Frank, there was something, I can't remember verbatim what he said, but he goes, where is she? And they said, I don't know, but she's, along the lines of this place or something, and he said, I'll take care of it. And he sent some people
unfortunately, she had she met George C. Scott when she was filming the Bible, and they were cast opposite each other, and they began a love affair that was not a positive one. He was he would get incredibly drunk and incredibly violent,
right?
And it was just a really bad situation. And there's a story that Ava had, a lot of really close personal friends. Some of them were Hollywood stars, and some of them were kind of in her own world and orbit, in addition to being very close to her family. And one of her longest relationships was with a lady nicknamed Renee Jordan, who wrote a wonderful book called Living with Miss G.
Right.
That is a kind of chronicle of their shared life and their shared experiences together and the ups and downs of that. It's both kind of a...
She worked for Ava, right?
Kind of she was basically Ava's personal assistant.
Right. Okay.
And they met really, kind of early before the fame, really, right at the beginning of things for Ava. And they were, she worked with her for a number of years. And then even after that, they stayed very close friends and stayed in touch for the remainder of Ava's life. And
that's beautiful.
And Renee, when there was this particular instance where Ava had gone off with George to Connecticut, I believe. I'm not sure if that's where he lived at the time, but Renee had not heard from her, and she was concerned because she did not care for him at all. And she did call Frank and say, Frank, or Mr. Sinatra, I'm not sure what Renee called him.
Frankie boy.
Said, Frankie boy. That would have been something. But said, I'm concerned. I don't know what's going on, and I can't reach her. And he said, let me see. And then Renee said, like 2 hours later, in walked Ava, and she had been abused at that point by him, and it was just a bad relationship, and didn't last very long, but it was very traumatic, and it was something that Ava did talk frankly about quite a bit in her autobiography, and then again in subsequent interviews or books that have been written about her. It's documented there, but it's just a bad situation, and it's something that really I think Ava it left emotional scars beyond the bruises, healing, that experience.
Naturally.
And it's fortunate that she had a close group of friends and family that were there, Renee being one of them, Frank obviously being there, but that helped her get through that, and her own strong will to say, enough of this.
Right.
He's not good for me. I've got to get away. And
more power to her, because she was able to walk away from it with her head high, even though she had emotional scars and things. But she was smart enough and strong enough to break away, which is very powerful. Very powerful.
It's not an easy thing to do.
Right.
And and there's all kinds of reasons why people stay in bad relationships, and her relationships were passionate and stormy, and that was something, but that was on a whole other thing.
She was intense.
Level, and,
yeah. Absolutely. What are some of your I know I will not dare ask your favorite film, because it's I know better than to ask those kind of questions to people who love certain actors and actresses, because it's like, how do you choose, but what are some of your a few of your kind of top favorites, knowing everything, being so involved with Ava?
Well, it's been really great, and to kind of like I said, in working with the museum, do a deeper dive in her films and revisit a lot of her films, ones that I may have seen. I grew up with TCM, and that was, for a generation of us and subsequent generations, that's our kind of early film school.
Yeah.
And had that as a wonderful resource to watch a lot of her movies and discover a lot of her films. And it always strikes me really, strongly the breadth of her career and the type. I mean, she really made kind of a film in almost every genre.
Yes.
People don't always think of that. They may think of, they kind of gravitate to a few here and there, but, she, of course, made one of the quintessential film noir films, The Killers.
Yes.
She made, musicals, and then at some point, sometimes she was overdubbed, sometimes it's her own voice, maybe just a song that pops up here or there in a movie. She made, kind of historical romantic films like, The Knights of the Round Table as Guinevere, or she made westerns like Lone Star. Right. She made, and then later in life, she made, disaster film like Earthquake, or a horror film like The Sentinel. So it's really neat
incredibly
to see that
diverse.
She worked in so she was never really pigeonholed. A lot of her roles did kind of fall. I don't know that there's really a kind of a generalized moniker for them, but she did kind of play. Her beauty was a factor in a lot of her roles and the characters, but she took them beyond that and she made them more than that.
Multidimensional, yes.
And gave them a lot more depth. Over the last year, I was very excited when the re-release was done of Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. Absolutely. That was a film that I had seen as a teenager, and I liked it then, but I don't know that I saw all that was there until revisiting it. And I worked with the museum on a exhibit about the film and a subsequent virtual exhibit. And then our first of those Ava Chats that I mentioned was about Pandora. So last year was kind of my year of Pandora and the Flying Dutchman. And I spent a lot of time with that film. And I just really fell in love with that movie. I thought her performance is just a fascinating performance. It's such a interesting film. It's so different, and it's hard to classify, which I love that about it. It's highly artistic, and my background as an artist and designer, I'm really drawn to that, and how if you pause that movie at any point in time, it looks like it's a painting, and there's such high levels of detail in the costuming and all the set pieces and all the things in the background that every time I've watched it, and when the new Blu-ray came out, and I got that over the summer, it's like, I've lost count at this point how many times I've watched the movie. But every time I watch it, I find something new. And I'll, message a friend of mine and be like, oh my gosh, did you notice this? Or did you see this? And that's really been fun to kind of get so passionate about a specific film. So right now, that's one that's just really kind of up high for me. And it's the first film, that was released in 1951, and it was the first film where she first lead role in a Technicolor film. She had a bit part in Dewberry Was a Lady years earlier, but it's a very small role. And then so she did Pandora and the Flying Dutchman and Showboat. Those were both released around the same time. Pandora was released first in Europe, and Showboat was released first in the States. So American audiences first saw her in glorious Technicolor in Showboat here, but in Europe it was Pandora. And Pandora is a film that it has a high, kind of a very, very European sentiment to it. It's highly European in the kind of the language and the references and kind of the things that the kind of artistic touchstones in the film, to kind of a high culture to it. And it's just got a lot of depth to it. And I just find it endlessly fascinating. So that's one that's really like up there for me. I also love The Night of the Iguana, because I feel like that character and the way she plays it, and it's so, it's her in capri pants the whole time, just with a kind of a scoop neck kind of sweatshirt on, and yet she's just stunning and so endlessly fascinating in that role. And it feels very true to a lot of her personality. What you read about her personality just kind of, and I just think that's really a real standout for me. And it's completely different, than Pandora. So it's kind of that's the other thing. I just love how, each one of her roles seems so different than the one before. It just doesn't seem like, she didn't fall into this one category. And I think that makes revisiting her films really worthwhile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know it's one of my favorites. I love like Barefoot Contessa, The Killers, The Bribe. There's so many films that she did that are just, I think The Barefoot Contessa was the first film that I had seen because I'm this huge Humphrey Bogart fan. And so when Ava came on the screen though, I mean, oh my God, it was just incredible. I was like, okay, it was so special.
Yeah, you see that scene of her, on the boat where she's, gonna sunbathe, and she just throws down her, her coverall, and then, gives them this look like, yeah, you want to see me, here I am. Such confidence, and such, like, kind of self-recognition or self-acknowledgement, in a lot of ways. Which is, again, it's just her performances, I think, especially, as her career progressed and she was more comfortable in her own skin on screen, they do have a real modern sensibility to them, and the way she portrays these characters. And, I was talking with someone not too long ago about kind of the second half of her career after she left, her MGM contract ended, and kind of when she was able to be more selective in her roles and command her own, this is what I want, and this is what I'm going to charge, Yeah, and how she, she did films where she was somewhat of a featured character, a star, like a film like 7 Days in May. She has she's only in 3 scenes of that movie, but her character is a character that is referenced and resonates throughout the entire arc of that film's narrative. Completely. And she doesn't have to be on screen, but she's so commanding, and she, leaves it all out there. Just gives it her all in those scenes, and that's true in a lot of her earlier films too. She may have been kind of a secondary character, like in East Side West Side, she's the secondary character. Barbara Stanwyck's the female lead, but her character just resonates and is referenced, and you kind of feel her character percolating in the background. And I think that's really an interesting kind of thing to think about with her career and the films that either she made because she was under contract and didn't have a choice, or she made because she chose to make them. That's a thread that kind of follows, that her characters may not have a lot of scenes or may not be the lead, but they live in that film through the entire beginning to end of those films,
Absolutely. What do you think she would think about the way she's remembered today?
That's a good question. I hope that she would be proud of the work that the museum does, and I hope that, there's the museum, and then there's also, she established in her lifetime a living trust that was going to extend, after her passing, and it was designed to help support her 2 remaining sisters who were still alive, and then ultimately it was she had designated some charities and things to support. I think she'd be surprised that she's remembered as she is, and she passed away in 1990. TCM didn't come around till 94.
That was 3 years before I was born, so that says something.
She didn't. Yeah, she did. So she didn't live to see this kind of reevaluation and growing. People, anytime, I'm sure you've been to TCM events, I've been to a bunch of TCM events, and you hear, one of the things that the hosts over the years have always kind of commented on is that they get kind of mad when people say, well, all movies are for old people or whatever, that kind of sentiment. And it's not true. And you go to these events and the bulk of the people are, under 40 there, maybe even younger than that. And, TCM has been such a wonderful place to discover these films and a way to see them and understand them and put them into context and all of the wonderful work that they do. And I think she would be surprised that her legacy and her impact is still being felt and being rediscovered in the way that it is. But I think she'd also ultimately be proud, because then that means that the living trust that she set up, which right now it helps support the mission of the museum, but it also supports St. Jude's, and it supports Queen Victoria Hospital, where she had been a patient. And so her life and legacy continues to support those causes and give back. And I think that really gets to the sentiment of kind of a part of who she was in terms of her caring about other people and her humanitarian efforts in her lifetime and that of her family. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think she'd be surprised, like I said, but she'd be very proud that her career can continue to give dividends like that.
That's
and
amazing.
Pay it forward.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, Lora, thank you so much for taking the time to sharing about Ava, her life, her legacy, her loves, her films. It's just incredible. Can you tell...
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell listeners, you mentioned the virtual, the Ava Chats and things like that. Do you want to mention again just where you guys can be found online, on social media, where they can find you?
Sure. If you want to follow me, I'm Lora Stocker. Twitter is where I do a lot of stuff and share a lot of the my personal design projects and other things that I do with the museum, and support that. And it's LoraStocker. And then, but most importantly, the museum. Their website is avagardner.org, and we have accounts. We have, of course, a YouTube page, and we share some videos, and we have some tour videos of the museum that we did last year at the beginning of the pandemic when we, had to close to in-person visitation. And there's some great videos. You can see some of our exhibits. We're in the process of completely changing out almost the bulk of the exhibits. So we've got a lot of fun things coming up and a lot of programming that we're doing in conjunction with new exhibits. But we are very active on social media. We do a lot to try and share her story. And when people are talking about her films or things are airing, we try to kind of join that conversation and share some of the unique artifacts that are part of the museum's permanent collection. And then we have, like you said, and like I said earlier, we've expanded into our virtual offerings over the last year to kind of bring the museum to the people and share where people can enjoy the museum from home or from wherever they are. Because Ava in her lifetime, she became a star here, but she is she's also a huge international star, and she is very much beloved in lots of the world, and she made her home in she lived for a number of years in Spain and a number of years in England, so she has a lot of fans and a lot of connections and ties all over the world. And so these virtual events have been a wonderful way for us to share things from the museum and the conversations we're having about her beyond the confines of being able to come to Smithfield. We certainly want you to come because you can visit the museum, you can visit her gravesite, you can go by her the home where she was born, that her father and mother built, is still standing, and you can drive by there and do kind of a heritage tour of her early life.
That's so special.
But if you can't make it, check out the website. And we're doing, we've done 2 of the Ava Chats events. We've got some others in the works that we'll be announcing soon for the next couple months. And then we're going to be doing some tied to our new exhibits, which are going to be the newest exhibit that we're doing in the museum is about, kind of, again, shows the breadth of her career. We're doing costumes that are from our permanent collection that span her entire career, from her earliest years in Hollywood all the way through her TV work in the 1980s before she retired. So it's going to be a really cool exhibit with a lot of shows just kind of the diversity of the work that she did. And we're going to be doing virtual components to each of those exhibits. So if people can't come in person, they can go to avagardner.org and go through the gift shop and be able to access a virtual version of those exhibits and get a taste of what we're sharing. So we just got a lot of stuff going on and a lot of ways that we try to engage with the fans around the world and bring the museum to people, and whether they can come in person or not. So, and then just to tee it off, we're in the early stages of planning stuff for 2022, which will be the beginning of her centennial year. And
Wow.
her birthday will be Christmas Eve, 2022, and that will kick off a whole wonderful year of centennial celebrations for Ava. So we've got a lot of stuff in the works, but check out the website and follow us on social, and you can see what we're doing and what we've got cooking.
Yes.
And just join the conversation. We would love to hear from fans all over the world, and if they've got ideas or things they want us to share or talk about, let us know.
Completely. You heard it, kids. You know where to go. Go follow. Go learn more about Ava.
That was a very long spiel.
No.
Lots of ways. We're doing lots of stuff out there. So we got lots of ways you can learn about us.
It appropriately fitting for a woman who is larger than life,
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, Lora, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk about everything that you do and about Ava's legacy, and thank you for your contribution to TCM and to Classic Hollywood.
Well, it takes all of us having this
a village.
Passion. It's just it does, and it's such a wonderful gift to connect with people all over the country. Sometimes we can feel isolated, especially right now in the middle of the pandemic, but being able to connect with classic film fans, it's just such a warm and welcoming community by and large, and it's wonderful to be one little part of it, like you, and like you're part of it too, and we all just kind of can connect and share this passion and this love for these wonderful films.
Agreed. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much. And, I look forward. I want to come visit in person sometime, maybe the next year.
You need to. Yeah. I'll give you a special tour.
Oh, don't tempt me. Don't tempt me. I love that kind of stuff. It's like the whole thing with James Dean and all of that. It's like I go to Indiana at least once or twice a year, to the small town of Fairmount, and go to the museum and see where he was, where he was born and where he lived. And it's so special going back to the roots of someone who really radically changed, creativity in films. And geez, I would love to visit and see everything Ava's.
I've been there too, and I loved it. So I know I love to travel, and anytime I go anywhere, I'm always looking, okay, was there a star from here? Is there anything here for the star?
Yeah.
What can I see?
Yes.
What museum can I go to? Or where's their archive? Can I see, is there a historical marker? And so that's a fun way to kind of connect to these stars on the deeper level and understand how their background and their roots shaped
what made them
that we know and love as the star that we recognize on the big screen. And it's a wonderful way to connect to somebody like that.
Completely.
So,
the roots make the tree, right? I mean, that's
right. Absolutely. Great way of saying that.
Thank you. I mean, it's true. It's, this is where they come from, and this is, I think that's amazing. It's amazing. So thank you so much, Lora. I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. All right, guys. That was another episode of Calling Old Hollywood. Until next time.